Listen carefully, because what you're about to hear was never meant for the public ear. Kentucky, 1834, a farmhouse lit only by stormlight and a single trembling candle. A midwife cries out not in pain, not in fear of death, but in horror at what she has just witnessed. 3 children born that night, not ordinary infants, but something else. Their eyes reflected no light. Their cries cut the air like metal tearing, and within weeks, every witness to their birth would vanish. Erased, their names scratched from records, their graves unmarked, their history sealed. For nearly 200 years, the truth of those triplets has been buried, locked away by church, by state, by science itself. Not because they were monsters, but because their very existence shattered the illusion of control. If 3 children could bend reality simply by being born, what else have you been told is impossible? What other anomalies have been erased before you ever had the chance to question? This is not folklore, this is not rumor, this is documented history, hidden in fragments, covered with blood and silence. And tonight, you're going to hear what they never wanted you to know, because the mystery of the Kentucky triplets is not just about the past, it is about the system that still controls you now, the silence that still shapes your choices. The cage you don't even know you're living in. Stay with me, because once you hear this, you will never see the world the same way again. Listen carefully, because what I'm about to say was never meant for the public ear. Imagine Kentucky 1834. A storm clawed across the hills, lightning revealing the shadows of a farmhouse half rotted by time. Inside, a midwife screamed not from fear, but from something deeper, the horror of witnessing what no woman should ever witness. 3 infants were born that night, not twins, triplets, but they weren't like other children. Their arrival bent the silence of the room into something unnatural, as though the air itself recoiled. The records, the few that survived, described their eyes as black pools that reflected no light, their cries dissonant, almost metallic, as though the sound didn't belong to human lungs. These weren't exaggerations written by fearful folk. They were official accounts, signed by churchmen and doctors who vanished within the year, their names erased from the rolls of the county, and yet a whisper of the event survived. Hidden in journals, archived in fragments, passed in trembling voices among those who knew that something had stepped through the veil that night, something science still cannot explain. Now, you might think this is just folklore, a rural ghost story inflated by fear. But lean closer, because I'm telling you, the mystery of these triplets isn't just about a strange birth in 1834. It's about power. It's about manipulation. It's about secrets woven so tightly into the fabric of history that men were silenced, families erased, and institutions forced to cover their tracks to ensure that you, yes, you, listening right now, would never even hear of it. Why? Because the truth wasn't that 3 children were born strange. The truth was that their existence threatened the foundation of control itself. Imagine a society built on order, hierarchy, obedience. What happens if something emerges that does not belong to that system? Something that refuses to be categorized, explained, or broken down by science, religion, or state. It destabilizes the illusion. It awakens questions you were never supposed to ask. That is why I need you to stay with me. Every second you watch this, you step deeper into knowledge that cannot be unlearned. I will show you how this single event in Kentucky connects to a lineage of suppressed history, the dark seam of corruption that binds institutions together. Church, crown, science, and secret societies, all feeding from the same wound. The birth of those children was not an isolated nightmare. It was a sign, a cipher, a doorway into understanding the machinery of control that still grips you today. But be warned, once you hear the truths buried here, you will not walk away the same man. You will see the strings in every government, every corporation, every pulpit. And when you see the strings, you can never go back to believing in puppets. So now I ask you, are you ready to descend? The midwife who delivered the triplets was never seen again. Her name appears in the parish record only once next to the date of that night and then vanishes. Some say she left town, driven mad by what she witnessed. Others whisper she was silenced, her mouth sewn shut not by thread but by fear, the kind that only powerful men can inspire. But there is something stranger. Within days of the birth, county officials arrived with documents stamped in wax orders to remove the children from the farmhouse. Not by force, not violently, but with a cold efficiency. The family was told these children required special care, that they were not to be raised in the ordinary manner, and here's the chilling part, the parents did not resist. Some kind of psychological weight pressed on them, as if they already knew they could not keep their own blood. Where were the triplets taken? To this day, there is no official record. But in the archives of a forgotten medical college in Lexington, researchers have uncovered fragments of correspondence between doctors and state officials. The letters describe anomalous subjects, unified but distinct identities. And the most haunting phrase of all, the resonance is complete. What resonance? Why did 3 infants provoke such terror in the men who held power? And why does every trace of them vanish after 1834? Except for the strange reports of villagers who claimed to see figures standing silently at the edge of cornfields, long after midnight. I tell you this because you must understand. The world you inhabit is carefully managed. History itself is edited, just like a book with missing chapters, and what is left for you to read is not the truth, but the version that keeps you obedient, docile, compliant. What you're hearing right now, this raw fragment of 1834, was scrubbed from the official story because it threatens to expose something much larger. The hidden machinery that determines not only what you are told, but what you are allowed to think. This isn't just about the triplets, it's about you. It's about how many truths have been erased before you were even born, leaving you blind, wandering in a story written by men who profit from your ignorance. So I ask again, are you ready to keep descending? Because the next step will show you how this story is not unique, but part of a pattern repeating across centuries. History is full of sudden erasures, events we are told to forget. But the birth of the triplets fits into a larger cycle, one you were never meant to see. Across Europe, centuries before Kentucky, there are records of trifold births linked to omens, upheavals, and regimes collapsing under mysterious circumstances. In 1587, Spain recorded the birth of 3 daughters with identical markings across their shoulders. Within weeks, plague swept through the region, decimating villages. The children disappeared into monasteries, never spoken of again. In Russia, 1713, the archives whisper of 3 brothers born under a blood moon. Witnesses claimed they spoke their first words within days of birth in languages the midwives could not identify. By the end of that year, their province fell into rebellion, its leaders executed in public squares. And then silence, no mention of the brothers after the uprising. Kentucky in 1834 wasn't a random accident, it was part of this chain, a hidden rhythm, a pulse that beats beneath history. Triplets who appear as if conjured, each time accompanied by fear, erasure, and institutional cover-up. Science cannot explain it. Religion fears it. Governments erase it. But still it happens. Why? Because these births are not about genetics, chance, or biology. They are signals, each one a disruption, a warning that the boundaries of reality are thinner than you were taught to believe. And here's the most dangerous thought. What if the triplets were never entirely human? What if they were echoes of something older, intelligence woven into flesh, placed here to destabilize systems of control? Imagine the terror of kings, priests, and presidents if they knew children could arrive into their world carrying knowledge not taught, but embedded knowledge that could undo the very chains they use to bind us. When you connect these dots, the picture emerges. Institutions aren't built to serve truth. They are built to contain it. They exist to trap your mind in stories safe enough to keep you quiet. And every now and then, when something uncontrollable slips through like the triplets in Kentucky, the system reacts like a predator defending its prey. Erase, silence, bury, but fragments remain. Enough for you to trace, enough for you to realize that you've been lied to since the day you could walk. By now, you might be asking, if this is real, where's the evidence? That's exactly the trap. The evidence was never destroyed. It was hidden in plain sight, encoded in symbols, rituals, and the very architecture of institutions you trust. Let me show you. Visit any grand cathedral, Masonic lodge, or government hall built before the 20th century. Look closer at the carvings, the frescoes, the patterns etched into stone. You will see triads, 3 serpents, 3 flames, 3 interlocking circles. These aren't decorations, they're warnings. They mark the presence of the triplet pattern. The elites knew, they always knew. The architecture is a language of power, and through it, they tell each other what they dare not tell you. The Kentucky triplets weren't the first to terrify men in suits. And they weren't the last, but they were among the few that slipped into recorded history before being locked away in secret files. And ask yourself this: if institutions can bury living children, if they can erase a family line and silence an entire town, what else can they bury? How many other truths lie beneath the surface of the life you call normal? This isn't just about supernatural birth, it's about psychological control. If they can decide what history you are allowed to remember, they can decide who you are allowed to become. And the worst part, you don't even resist. You were raised to comply, trained to accept the script, conditioned to believe that forgetting is the same as truth. But it isn't. Forgetting is a weapon. Erasure is control. That night in 1834 wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message to every man listening now. You live in a cage built by hands you will never shake. Do you know what makes this truly dangerous? It isn't the strangeness of the triplets. It's the way the event exposes how fragile reality really is. The triplets are a symbol living proof that the system you serve cannot explain, cannot contain, and cannot destroy everything. The newspapers of 1834, those few that dared mention the strange birth before they were pulled from circulation, hinted at something more. Reports of men in black coats moving through villages at night, carrying crates. Families awakened by low humming sounds outside their windows, as though the earth itself vibrated. Animals fleeing their pens without reason. It wasn't just 3 children born, it was an opening, a crack in the wall between the seen and the unseen. And here is the truth that should chill you. Cracks like this appear every generation. They are not accidents. They are pressures building until the system cannot contain them. That's why events like this always precede upheaval, war, rebellion, collapse. Because when the veil splits, order unravels. Men in power know this. That's why they fear the triplet pattern. Not because it's mysterious, but because it reveals the illusion of their authority. If forces exist that science cannot measure and governments cannot control, then the entire architecture of obedience crumbles, and they cannot allow that. Not then, not now. That's why you've never been told this story in school. Why no documentary dares touch it. Why the truth is buried in whispers. Because if you knew the reality, if you knew you lived in a managed illusion, you might start asking the only question that terrifies them. What else have they hidden? And once you ask that question, brother, you never stop. Every man fears the unknown, but powerful men fear it most of all, because their entire empire depends on predictability, on control. The Kentucky triplets were not simply unusual children. They were a rupture in the system, a reminder that nature doesn't ask permission. In the months after their birth, local churches declared them an abomination, yet not a single priest dared to name them publicly from the pulpit. Why? Because the church had already been instructed from higher authorities that silence was the safest weapon, and silence is often more powerful than condemnation. The family's farmhouse was burned to the ground, its ashes scattered by rain. But here's the detail most overlook. The fire was set not to destroy evidence of birth, but to erase what had been left behind. Strange markings scorched into the wooden beams of the floor, markings the townsfolk swore were not made by human hands. Circles inside circles, lines intersecting in ways that defied geometry. This was more than a tragedy. It was a signal, a message to those who had eyes to see. Something had come through, and the system moved quickly to shut the door. The story is the same every time. Something unexplainable rises. Institutions move in to contain it, and the people, they forget. They let the story fade into rumor. That is the true horror, not that strange children were born, but that men willingly surrender their memory. You might wonder, why would governments and churches care about 3 strange infants in a backwater county? The answer is control of the narrative. History is not a record, it is a weapon. By the early 1800s, America was already a laboratory. Secret societies, Masons, Rosicrucians, early fraternities were testing new ways of molding the masses. Newspapers, churches, and schools were tools, not for enlightenment, but for shaping minds into obedience. And then the triplets, living proof that something beyond the system's grasp could slip through, something unpredictable, something that could not be stamped into the mold of normal. The letters we found in archives make it clear. Scientists were ordered not to study them, but to categorize them as anomalies of biology. Notice the trick: name it, label it, file it away. The illusion of explanation replaces truth. This tactic is still used today. When confronted with the unexplainable, authorities give you a word, a phrase: mass hysteria, delusion, conspiracy theory. Labels to shut your mind before it even begins to question. The triplets weren't erased because they were dangerous. They were erased because they were proof that the system's grip is fragile, and fragility, once revealed, spreads like fire. Let me take you deeper into the psychology of control. The men who orchestrated this cover-up understood something most of us never do. Memory is the battlefield. You don't need to chain a man's body if you can erase or rewrite his memory. That's why whole generations were trained to believe that their history was complete, that their textbooks told the full story. In truth, you were handed a curated illusion, a stage play designed to keep you docile. When the Kentucky triplets were taken, the parents were not executed. They weren't imprisoned. They were left alive, but they were reprogrammed. Neighbors reported that within weeks, they spoke of the children as though they had never existed. They worked their fields as before, smiled at gatherings, and when questioned about that stormy night in 1834, their eyes went blank. What does that tell you? It wasn't just a cover-up. It was an experiment in mass forgetting. A test run of something that would later evolve into the science of psychological warfare techniques, refined, perfected, and still in use today. You are not just lied to, you are trained to forget the very moments when the veil splits. And here is the darkest truth. You already carry the scars of this programming. You have forgotten more than you realize. Across the United States, hidden in county records and dusty archives, there are other stories, echoes of the same pattern. Strange births, sudden disappearances, families silenced, entire communities falling into blankness. In 1892, Iowa, 3 infants were reported to have been born with identical features and voices that could mimic the cries of animals. The story ran in a local paper for one day, then vanished, replaced by reports of barn fires. No follow-up, no explanation. In 1927, West Virginia, a coal miner swore he had seen 3 children standing at the mouth of a shaft, their eyes glowing in the dark. He returned with others the next day, nothing, but the man never spoke again, and even in the modern age, whispers persist. Soldiers in Vietnam claim to have encountered 3 identical figures in jungle villages. Journalists laughed it off, but the reports, buried in military archives, match the same descriptions from Kentucky, from Spain, from Russia. What does this tell you? The triplets of 1834 weren't a single event. They were part of a lineage, a fracture line that keeps breaking through, generation after generation, and each time, men in power scramble to erase the evidence before the rest of us can connect the dots. But you are connecting them now, and once you see the pattern, the illusion shatters. Now let's confront the most dangerous possibility. What if the triplets weren't human accidents at all? What if they were deliberately placed here not by nature, not by chance, but by intelligence? Think of it. Every time they appear, upheaval follows. Rebellion, plague, war. The triplets arrive not as children, but as catalysts. Their existence bends reality, disrupts order, tears holes in the machinery of control. Science cannot explain them because they are not phenomena to be explained. They are messages, living codes, embodiments of something that refuses to be controlled. And here's the part that will gnaw at you. What if they were meant for you? What if you, watching this, were never supposed to hear their story because their story is a mirror of your own? You were born into a system that trained you to obey, to forget, to believe the script. But just like those triplets, you are capable of breaking it. That is why the story was buried. That is why the names were erased. Because if men like you awaken, if you begin to question, if you begin to see, the entire edifice trembles. So remember this, the triplets were not erased because they were weak. They were erased because they were strong. And if you are still listening, it means you have begun to awaken to the same strength. Every empire has its architects of silence. You've heard their names: Freemasons, Jesuits, Rosicrucians, the hidden orders who pull strings in the dark. But here's the truth few dare to say: these orders were not formed to pursue light or knowledge. They were formed to manage it, to decide who sees and who remains blind. The Kentucky triplets were not simply removed because they frightened the locals. They were cataloged. Their existence was folded into a vault of forbidden knowledge guarded by secret societies whose rituals, symbols, and architecture hide the story in plain sight. Look closely at Masonic lodges built in the 1800s. You will find engravings of 3 interlocked circles, often disguised as simple decoration. Look at Jesuit manuscripts, and you will see triple suns radiating in patterns that do not match natural geometry. These are not coincidences. These are codes, a whisper from one generation of gatekeepers to the next. The pattern continues. The anomalies remain. Guard the silence. Because if the masses knew, if men like you knew that reality itself cracks open at intervals, that something uncontrollable keeps pressing through, then obedience would collapse, control would vanish, and every institution, from church to state, would bleed power. That is why secret societies exist, not to enlighten, to contain. But how do you contain the uncontainable? That was the problem posed by the Kentucky triplets. You cannot erase the fact that they existed. Someone always remembers. So you do something darker. You bury the truth under layers of ritual and psychology until even those who stumble onto it cannot fully grasp what they've seen. Consider this. The very concept of triplets in folklore is twisted into superstition. 3 witches, 3 fates, 3 horsemen. The number 3 is whispered as cursed, chaotic, unlucky. That's not an accident. It's programming, a symbolic toxin injected into culture to make you recoil from the truth before you even encounter it. They turned the symbol of rupture into something to laugh at, fear, or dismiss. And when the real triplets appeared in Kentucky, society was already primed to bury them in ridicule and silence. This is how control works, not just by erasing events, but by poisoning the very lens through which you see them. They don't need to stop you from finding fragments of truth. They just need to make sure you interpret those fragments incorrectly. So the question becomes, how many other symbols have been weaponized against you? How many truths sit right in front of your eyes, dismissed because someone taught you to sneer, to laugh, to forget? Now we descend further into the realm of suppressed science, because by the mid-1800s, hidden branches of medicine and physics were already studying what they dared not name. The fragments of correspondence about the triplets mention resonance. That word appears again and again. Resonance. Why? Because the children were not simply unusual in appearance. Their very presence altered the space around them. Instruments of the time, crude but functional, registered vibrations, low frequencies, patterns that should not have existed. What does resonance mean? It means alignment. It means frequency. It means that these children carried within them a vibration that was not of ordinary flesh and blood. And that vibration disrupted everything near them. Clocks stuttered, candles guttered, animals panicked. Imagine what that implies, that biology itself can carry frequencies that shake the stability of matter. That human life, when born outside the system's design, can destabilize the machinery of reality. Now you understand why science buried it, because modern physics could have been born in 1834 Kentucky. Instead, it was hidden, parceled out in secret laboratories, while the public was fed safer illusions about gravity and motion. The triplets weren't just a mystery, they were a missed revolution, and that revolution was stolen from you. But let's take a step back and consider the wider picture. Why are such truths buried? Because men in power know that control is not maintained through force but through belief. Think of it. A society is nothing but a story that everyone agrees to tell. Money, law, nation, even morality, all fictions we inhabit because we are told they are real. But when anomalies appear, like the Kentucky triplets, they expose the fiction. They show that the world is not solid, but malleable, fragile, easily disrupted. If men like you understood that, truly understood that reality is negotiable, that control is an illusion, then the game would end. You would stop playing, and once enough men stop playing, the empire collapses. So the rulers feed you carefully edited histories. They feed science that explains just enough to keep the machine running, but not enough to free your mind. They bury anomalies not because they are dangerous in themselves, but because they remind you of your own hidden power. The triplets weren't the threat, the awakening they represented was. Now comes the hardest truth to swallow. What happened in Kentucky wasn't just history, it was prophecy. Every generation, the triplet pattern reemerges. Not always in literal children, but in events, in uprisings, in cracks in the illusion. They are signs that the system is weakening, that control is slipping. And when these signs appear, the same playbook unfolds: denial, ridicule, erasure. The Kentucky triplets were silenced not because they broke the rules of nature, but because they broke the rules of control. They revealed a universe larger than the cage. They showed that the system cannot contain everything. And here's where you come in, because you listening now are standing at the same threshold. You were not meant to hear this story. You were not meant to connect the dots, but now you have, which means you face the same choice the parents faced in 1834, deny, forget, and return to the cage. Or remember and carry the weight of forbidden knowledge, and I will ask you plainly, here and now, if you're still with me, comment these words twice below: the cage is cracking. Do it not just to engage, but to mark the moment of your transformation. Because once you write those words, you declare yourself no longer a pawn in their game. This is the halfway point. From here forward, we go deeper into the core of corruption, the machinery of manipulation, and the hidden knowledge that has been stolen from you since birth. You've heard the phrase, history repeats itself. But what if it doesn't repeat by accident? What if it is engineered to repeat a cycle managed by hands that never let go? The Kentucky triplets were not the beginning of a story. They were a continuation, because the pattern stretches back to the ancients long before America existed. Egyptian inscriptions whisper of three, born sons of the serpent. Babylonian texts describe the triad who stand outside time. Even the Bible, though filtered and edited, makes constant reference to three who are one. Here's the chilling part: those cultures didn't see triplets as accidents of birth. They saw them as signs of intrusion. Warnings that something older, something not entirely human, was pressing into our world. And every empire, Egypt, Babylon, Rome, had the same response: silence them, remove them, then encode their existence into symbols only the initiated could read. 3 pillars, 3 crowns, 3 flames. So when the Kentucky Triplets arrived in 1834, the elites didn't panic. They recognized the pattern. They already had the playbook. The system was designed centuries earlier to absorb anomalies into silence. And once you understand that, you realize the cage you live in was not built yesterday. It is ancient, it is ritualized, it is blood-stained. But let's talk about blood, because blood is the oldest form of control. Every ruling system in history, pharaohs, kings, emperors, was obsessed with lineage. Why? Because bloodlines are more than inheritance, they are resonance. And anomalies like the Kentucky Triplets posed the ultimate threat to bloodline control. Children born outside sanctioned lineage, carrying vibrations that could not be contained. Documents buried in European archives describe attempts to breed out such anomalies. Forced marriages, selective unions, secret experiments in genetics before genetics had a name. The goal was not to strengthen humanity, but to prevent wild frequencies from appearing in the blood. And yet, despite centuries of control, the anomalies return. They surface where least expected. A farmhouse in Kentucky, a village in Spain, a coal town in Russia. Proof that the system cannot fully cage life itself. But what happens when the system fails, when anomalies survive? That is the nightmare that keeps elites awake at night. Because if even one anomaly slips free, if even one triplet pattern grows beyond containment, then bloodlines fracture, control dissolves, and the illusion of chosen rulers shatters. The Kentucky Triplets were not erased because they were powerless. They were erased because their very blood could have ended the hierarchy. By the 20th century, control had evolved into something even more sinister. No longer satisfied with silence, the system discovered a new weapon: distraction. You see, memory is dangerous, but so is attention. If they cannot erase a truth, they can bury it beneath noise, wars, scandals, celebrity gossip, endless entertainment. The machinery of distraction was built to keep your mind from dwelling on the cracks in the cage. Think of it. While archives whispered about the Kentucky Triplets, newspapers filled pages with circus acts, political squabbles, and gold rush hysteria. The strategy worked. By the time a man tried to recall the anomaly, he was already drowning in noise. This was the beginning of psychological warfare as mass entertainment. Bread and circuses, a trick as old as Rome, but refined with printing presses, radio, television, and now the endless scroll in your pocket. And here's the horror: distraction is more effective than force, because a chained man dreams of freedom, but a distracted man never even notices his chains. That is why you don't know the story of the Kentucky Triplets. Not because it was erased completely, but because it was buried under the avalanche of noise you call normal life. Now we reach the core of corruption, institutions themselves. Every empire needs guardians of silence. In the 1800s, it was the church and the state. Today, it is media, science, and corporations. Different masks, same function. They exist not to free your mind, but to keep it inside the lines. Think of your education. Were you taught to question history or to memorize it? Were you shown anomalies, or were you shown carefully packaged facts that always led back to the same conclusion? Trust authority, trust the system, trust the experts. The Kentucky Triplets expose the fraud. They prove that entire realities can be deleted from the textbooks, and if they can delete reality once, they can delete it again, and again, and again. Ask yourself, how many events, how many truths, how many lives have been buried the same way? If one farmhouse in Kentucky can vanish from memory, then so can entire wars, inventions, discoveries. Reality is not a record, it is a script, and you've been reading it since the day you were born. The triplets show us the ultimate truth. Your reality is edited. So where does this leave us? At the edge of the abyss. Because if the Kentucky Triplets were real and every fragment of evidence says they were, then everything you believe about history, science, and society is suspect. It means the world you live in is not solid, but stitched together like a stage set. It means you are surrounded by illusions designed to keep you calm, compliant, obedient. But here's the paradox. Once you see the cracks, the illusions weaken. Once you know the system lies, every lie becomes fuel. You are no longer a spectator. You are a participant in the unraveling. The triplets were not just children. They were the first tier in the curtain of America's carefully scripted history. And their story is not over, because patterns repeat, the resonance returns, and when it does, men like you must be ready not to forget, not to laugh, not to look away, but to see, because the cage is cracking. And the question is, will you step through? By the early 1900s, the system had perfected its methods. The silence of Kentucky became a prototype, a field test for something far larger. Because if you can erase the memory of 3 children, you can erase anything. And so the institutions expanded their reach. Universities created official science, dismissing anything unexplainable as myth or pseudoscience. Churches revised doctrines, branding anomalies as heresy. Governments built intelligence agencies designed not just to protect borders, but to protect narratives. The Kentucky Triplets were no longer just a buried story. They became a model for control. Their erasure proved that the masses would not resist if you simply gave them another story to believe. And then came the World War's perfect distractions, perfect opportunities to reshape history on a global scale. Entire generations were slaughtered, archives burned, and new institutions rose to rewrite the script. The cage grew stronger, but so did the cracks. In the shadows of those wars, new sciences emerged, sciences born from the very resonance hinted at in 1834. You've heard whispers of it. MKUltra, mind control experiments, psychic research hidden behind military doors. These weren't random projects. They were direct descendants of the anomalies like the triplets. Governments knew reality could be bent. They had seen it in Kentucky. Now they wanted to weaponize it. Documents declassified decades later describe children taken into programs, tested for abilities beyond the 5 senses. Remote viewing, telepathy, altered states, the kind of resonance the triplets radiated but controlled, engineered, weaponized. And what happened to those children? The same as the Kentucky family, erased. Forgotten, buried in silence, but the knowledge didn't disappear. It was folded into the military, industrial complex, hidden behind layers of secrecy. You were told it was all conspiracy, all fantasy. But behind closed doors, they knew, the cage can bend, and those who bend it control the game. By mid-century, control had taken its most dangerous form. Media, radio, television, cinema. These weren't inventions to entertain you. They were instruments to tune you, like strings on a harp. Frequencies, images, repetition, all designed to shape your memory, your emotions, your desires. The Kentucky Triplets showed that resonance could destabilize reality. Media became the inverse, resonance designed to stabilize it, to hypnotize you, to drown the cracks in a flood of sound and color. Think of it, you laugh at the idea of anomalies because you were trained to laugh. You dismiss forbidden history because you were taught the phrase conspiracy theory, a phrase invented, quite literally, by intelligence agencies to kill questions before they could spread. And so the greatest trick was pulled. They didn't need to erase history anymore. They only needed to convince you not to care. That is why most men sleep, and that is why only a few will ever wake. Now we stand in the digital age, the final evolution of the cage. Every scroll, every click, every thought you type into a machine is tracked, mapped, and fed into an algorithm. This is not technology serving you. It is you serving technology. You are training the system to predict your choices until choice itself becomes an illusion. This is the true perfection of the Kentucky experiment. In 1834, they had to erase a story with fire and silence. Today, they don't need fire. They just bury it under infinite distraction, engineered feeds, and digital noise. If the triplets were born today, their story wouldn't need to vanish in smoke. It would be drowned in memes, hashtags, and 1,000 other distractions. You would scroll past it, forget it in minutes. The silence would be voluntary, and that is the cruel genius of the system. You are now the warden of your own cage. But here is the paradox that terrifies them. The same digital machinery built to enslave you also carries the cracks. Stories resurface, anomalies spread, whispers slip through the algorithms. That is why you are hearing this now, because not even the system can fully contain the resonance. The Kentucky Triplets were erased for nearly 2 centuries, and yet, here you sit, listening. The silence failed, the resonance survived, and that means something profound. Cracks are opening faster now. More anomalies surface. More men begin to see. The cage, once thought unbreakable, trembles. This is why the system grows more desperate, more censorious, more aggressive. They know the cracks are widening. They know the resonance is returning, and they fear one thing above all, awakening, because when enough men awaken, the cage doesn't just crack, it collapses, and that, brother, is the path we are now walking. You've seen it by now, the cracks in the system, the way truths slip through the algorithm, how men begin to whisper what they were once too afraid to say. The silence no longer holds, and this terrifies the architects of control. But ask yourself, why now? Why, after nearly 2 centuries of suppression, does the resonance of 1834 return? Because the resonance was never truly buried. It was seeded, hidden in bloodlines, whispered through symbols, encoded into rituals. What began as the anomaly of 3 children became something more, a current of energy that refuses to die, and now, as cycles converge, that current rises again. The Kentucky Triplets were not an accident. They were a signal, a warning, a blueprint of what cannot be controlled, and the system knows it. That is why censorship rises. That is why fear campaigns intensify. They are trying to seal the cracks with fire before the flood breaks through. But the flood is coming. This is where you must understand something dangerous, something most men will never allow themselves to see. The system doesn't just control with lies, it controls with truth. Partial truths, half-truths, truths weaponized and twisted into cages. They will let you discover fragments, secret societies, rituals, corruption, but they never give you the whole picture. They want you chasing shadows, fighting illusions, never reaching the core. And what is that core? That you are not powerless, that resonance, the force the triplets embodied, exists in you, in every man who refuses the script, in every man who sees the strings and chooses to cut them. That is why they keep you numb, distracted, sedated, because if you discovered the resonance within, the cage could not hold you. No algorithm, no institution, no hierarchy could contain you. The Kentucky anomaly is not just a story about children. It is a mirror showing you what they fear most, your awakening. Now listen carefully, because this is the moment of choice. For 2 centuries, the resonance has whispered, tested, pushed against the bars of the cage. And now it demands something more, action, not the action of rebellion in the streets, not the hollow rage of shouting into voids, action in the only place that matters, within. To awaken is to fracture the script, to refuse the hypnotic resonance of media, to silence the noise long enough to hear the deeper frequency inside you, the same one that frightened midwives, priests, and doctors in 1834. And here is where you prove your place. Comment this phrase twice to lock it into yourself, to carve it into your identity. I hear the resonance. I break the cage. This is not a game. This is not engagement for algorithms. This is ritual. Speak it, write it, claim it, twice, and the system will know one more man has slipped from its grasp. The final truth is this: the system was never as strong as it appeared. It thrived on silence, on erasure, on fear. But when silence fails, when erasure collapses, when fear breaks, the cage becomes brittle. That is why the story of the Kentucky Triplets matters more now than ever. It is proof that suppression fails. That truth leaks through cracks. That resonance cannot be killed. They built wars, churches, schools, screens, and machines to bury a single night in 1834. And yet, you are here, listening. The fire did not consume it. The algorithm did not bury it. The silence did not hold. And if one forbidden truth can escape, so can others. So can all of them. And so, brother, we reach the end, but the descent never truly ends. You have heard what was hidden, you have seen the strings, you have felt the resonance, and now the choice is yours. Remain in the cage, comfortable, distracted, obedient, or awaken. See the cage for what it is: fragile, trembling, already collapsing. The Kentucky triplets were erased because they were dangerous. Not because they were monsters, but because they proved the system could not contain everything. The same is true of you. The same is true of any man who awakens. This is why I speak to you not as a storyteller, but as a mentor, because once you see the cage, once you hear the resonance, you are no longer a puppet. You are a blade, and blades do not fear cages. Blades cut them open, so remember the night of 1834. Remember the silence, the erasure, the fear, and remember this: the cracks are widening, the resonance rises, and nothing, no crown, no church, no government, no algorithm can stop what is coming. Because the forbidden does not die, it waits, it whispers, and when the time comes, it returns. You have heard the whisper, now decide what you will do with it.